Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, I'm excited about this one. We're going to have a great conversation today. But before we do, let's get started with kind of your background and kind of what led you to today. I know you have an interesting fact that you started as a receptionist in the real estate industry, and here you are. So let's hear it.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, I think that I probably, compared to most folks that are general partners in various ventures at this point, probably took a little bit of a weird winding road to get here. But yeah, so I started, I was one of those kids in college, went to University of Wisconsin, had no idea what I wanted to do. Family wasn't in business. Parents weren't in business. It was never something that was really even discussed at our house. Ended up just majoring in communications. Got to the point where I was just ready to kind of be done with college and move on. And I actually moved to Chicago after that and spent a little time trying to be an actor. Took a bunch of acting classes, was in a couple of commercials, and filmed a few movies. Nothing huge, nothing ever really took hold, but it was a fun thing to do from 22 to 25, and gave it a whirl. Have some good stories, but unfortunately, that's about all I have to show for that period. After that, like a lot of liberal arts majors, back then the default is go to law school, right? And started exploring that. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was planning to move from Chicago to San Francisco to go to graduate school. I liked her and figured, hey, I'm going to come along for the ride, see what happens. And ended up deciding not to go to law school, but spent a bunch of time trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And actually had an uncle back here in Minnesota, of all places, who had just converted an old prison to apartments and condos. A really cool project. And was talking to him and just talked to a bunch of folks, in all kinds of industries, trying to say, here's what I think I'm good at, what's out there. And of course, had never heard of development, didn't even realize there was people that created the buildings. I somehow figured they just showed up one day and somebody built them. But once I kind of understood what it was about, I thought, man, I like design, I like architecture. That sounds super cool. Like, I want to get into that somehow. And I'm a lot older than you, so it was back in the day when you looked on Craigslist for jobs or Monster.com, and then you sent you mailed in the mail cover letters and resumes to people with the hopes that they would call you on the telephone and invite you to their office for an interview. Needless to say, with 3 years of acting experience and a liberal arts degree, I wasn't very attractive to developers for some reason. I'm not sure why I didn't get a lot of calls, but I got none. And as luck would have it, I kind of got to the point where I'm like, look, I just need to get in the door somewhere. Like, if anybody would even have a cup of coffee with me or a conversation, like, I just need somebody to point me in the right direction. And, as luck would have it, shortly after that, I had applied to a receptionist job at a development firm. Because again, my goal was like, just get in the door, right? Maybe they're going to say you're ridiculous, but here's 3 people I know that might need somebody, et cetera, et cetera. And long story short, I ended up getting a call about the receptionist job. Drove an hour from my apartment after work one night to meet these folks. Didn't mean anything to me at the time, but it was Trammel Crowe residential in San Francisco, which apparently means something now. But at that point, I had no idea who I was talking to and what I was getting into. But they thought I was insane. And I basically just said, look, I want a job in development. I will do anything it takes. Coffee, copies, what have you. I'll do it. I just want a shot. And they, for whatever reason, thought I was just nuts enough to give me one. And I started commuting. I literally was commuting an hour each way to be the receptionist for a $40,000 salary at age 26. And every friend I have, every friend of mine in the world thought I was insane. My girlfriend thought I was nuts, but it was a gut feeling kind of thing. And I decided to make the decision to do it. And I'll tell you that making that decision, Chris, was A, obviously what got me started, but B, was one of the things in my path that was a great learning lesson for trusting my gut, right? It didn't make any sense on paper what I was doing, but there was just some feeling I had that, like, I think this could work out if I do it right. And anyway, I hustled like crazy. I commuted. I was the best damn receptionist there was for about 6 months. And you can imagine, guys my age at that point are lenders, right? I mean, they're coming in for meetings with
Yeah.
these guys. It's my peers, and my bosses did a great job of embarrassing me and making sure that I would get coffee and copies, and they let everyone know I was the receptionist for a long time. But about a year in, we got really busy. Timing was good, and they had more projects than they had hands. And at some point, they just said, "Hey, you want to take one?" And I said, sure. Had no idea what I was doing, of course, but had somebody looking over my shoulder. And after about a year and a half of being a receptionist, I moved straight into being a project manager. And then, 2, 3, 4 years after that, I was an associate partner with them. And it just kind of went from there.
Was there something, because I love that story of just getting yourself in the door, like, how do you position yourself as a receptionist to be someone that could take on a project? Where did you just kind of let everybody in the firm know your desires and dreams? Were there things you were kind of doing that signaled that you were, a good person to tap on when it was time?
Sure, that's a great question. Yeah, a couple of things that happened, and then probably a couple things I did also to kind of keep that going. I mean, one, just frankly, the fact that I was commuting an hour each way, was a sign to them of like, okay, he's obviously serious because this is ridiculous otherwise. Uh, and there was a vice president, there was a kind of a third guy at the firm, under the partners and above me, who was doing a lot of the project management. And he came to me 3, 4 months in, and he was overloaded and just said, "Hey, do you know how to do Excel?" And I lied and said, "Oh, yeah, sure. I know how to do Excel." And he started throwing spreadsheets my way. And I'd go home at night and try to figure out, Excel and how to work it and all that. And, a couple months after that, he came to me and said, "You had no idea how to do Excel, did you?" I said, "No, I didn't." But he was like, I'm impressed that you went home and figured it out on your own time and whatever. And I started asking the principals, like, "Hey, are there finance classes I should be taking at night? Like, what can I do?" I was pretty vocal and active about what can I do to be more valuable to you guys? What can I do to add more skills to my, knowledge base? I took a couple of finance classes in San Francisco. I flirted with a part-time MBA at Berkeley while I was working under them. And funny enough, they said, "Look, you can go get an MBA at Berkeley, but then when you're done, you're going to have the same job with us you have now. So maybe it's not worth it. Just learn from us." So, I was pretty active and vocal about, wanting to move up and wanting opportunity. And, they threw me a bone eventually.
I love it. It's a common thread amongst people that have found success in their career. They let the folks around them know where they're headed. I think it's the biggest, piece of advice I give to young people all the time is nobody can help you get where you're going if they don't know where you want to go. That's an awesome story. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. It's worked out. It's one of those where, right, they always say you can connect the dots looking back, how it all works out. But yeah, at that time, it was, most people for about the first 5 to 7 years of my career thought I was nuts, absolutely
Yeah,
nuts. So glad it worked out.
I love it. So you move up at Trammel Crowe Residential, which is an incredible company. They're actually based down here in DFW, or they were. So very very familiar with them. What was the next step between there and starting the company that you're currently running?
Sure. So um, when, and I should clarify, Chris, just it's the actual entity name I worked under was Thompson Dorfman Partners, but Will and Bruce, who had run that, they had run Trammel Crowe for a long time on the West Coast, and then broke off and had their own firm. After I left, they repartnered with Trammel, so it's been kind of in and out of Trammel, but
Got it.
yeah, that's the firm. So 2008, and my dates are a little fuzzy, but let's say sometime in 2008, they called me into the office and they said, "Look, you've been working with us for 5 years. Um, you've been doing a great job. Yeah, we're still paying you peanuts. You've run a couple projects for us now. We're happy to have you here. We want to start paying you like a real developer." And I'd been making 40 or 50 grand a year in San Francisco in my late 20s. So
Yeah.
to me, that was like music to my ears. That was like, oh my God, maybe I can start paying my college loans off. Like, it was like a big deal. And
Yeah.
I went home. told my girlfriend, I was like, I think we were probably engaged by that point. She was probably like, thank God. Um, but and we had one of those nights in San Francisco where we went out and I called all my friends and I was like, and it was a fun night. We had a great night and went back to the office the next day, turned on my computer, and I'm watching people file out of Lehman Brothers online. And again, I'm still getting my bearings here in business and real. So I hadn't quite made the connection of what this all means, but a couple weeks later, it was like, oh my god, this ain't good.
Yeah.
And it was so long story short, there was no pressure for me to move or for me to leave, but I realized quickly, like, this thing's going to last for a while. This is going to be tough. You've heard the stories about California entitlements where,
Mm-hmm.
it's 5, 7. I mean, we had deals that they were working on before I got there that after I left still hadn't been approved.
Wow.
So I looked at that as I was in early 30s at that point, looked at that and said, I'm not going to make it here for 10 more years if I don't get paid. I just can't.
Yeah.
And having grown up in the Midwest and my wife being from Minneapolis, I grew up in Madison mostly. We kind of said, look, if we're going to take it on the chin, let's go take it on the chin in the Midwest for a couple of years. And, we can come back or we can go somewhere else after that. Or, again, we were young, we were 30. We didn't have kids. We could kind of be flexible. And we decided to move to Minneapolis with kind of a 2-year plan of like, let's give it a fair shake. Let's give it 2 years. Let's see if we like it there. And then if we don't, we'll we were looking at Austin and Portland and some other cities also. And we just fell in love with it here. It's a really great city. And it was a tough breakup. I mean, it was leaving that firm because those guys had become, as you can imagine at that point, they were basically father figures to me. I mean,
Yeah.
they were, I felt like I was telling my family that I was moving across the country. And
Wow.
it was a rough ending. And admittedly, one of them didn't talk to me for about 2 years after it happened.
Yep.
And it was really brutal. But the good news is we're all good friends now. And I talk to them pretty regularly and all is well. And they're happy for me. But so I made the transition to Minneapolis and ironically used my acting background to land a job. Nobody was hiring in late 2009, early 2010, as you can imagine. There was one nonprofit tax credit developer that did some artist type housing around the country, and I used my acting background and acting plus development. It actually led to a job, if you can believe that. So took on some development work and some asset management work for this firm. Flew around the country, helping them kind of stabilize their portfolio during this time, and I was there for just a shade under 2 years. And as the market started to improve in 2011, we had kind of made the commitment to stay in Minneapolis. And I had been working very, very hard to kind of build my network here during that time. I knew that I probably wasn't going to be a long-term fit at the artist housing place. So any day I wasn't on an airplane somewhere else around the country, I was having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with people, just really trying to lay that groundwork, figuring when the market comes back, I can't be the new guy, right? I've got to have some connections. I've got to know some people to get in the door somewhere. And again, that's another one of those, right? You look back, connect the dots. It seemed like a smart move in hindsight. At the time, I remember coming home one night and just telling my wife at that point, like, I'm so sick of this networking. Like, I'm flying all over the country. Every second I'm back here in Minneapolis, I'm taking somebody out to lunch, breakfast, dinner. We don't have any money. Like, this is killing me. I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember her just saying, just just stick with it. Stick with it a little longer. Networks take a long time to build. Something good will come from it. I know it. Just again, trust your gut and keep going. And as luck would have it, as the market turned and started to get better, a lot of opportunities came my way, and ended up taking a job with an apartment fund here called Timberland Partners. Great company, and spent 6 years with them from 2011 to 2017, basically flying all over the country, buying suburban Class B apartment communities in secondary and tertiary markets. And I was there for 6 years. I think we bought something like 8,000 units in the 6 years I was there. So it was a great, obviously a great run. Really helped me round out my kind of tool belt with in California, I was a project manager, right? And I wasn't getting the financing. I wasn't putting the deal together. I wasn't finding the site. I was really just executing on the founder's vision. My time at Timberland was great because it really taught me how to find deals, how to get to know broker, just kind of how to do all the stuff I hadn't done before. So I was really prepared by the time I left, I think, to do my own thing. And it wasn't, I never had it in the back of my head that like I have to go do my own thing. I had just gotten to a point at Timberland where it kind of made sense. There wasn't much more. There wasn't any step up for me at that point. I'd kind of done what I came to do, and decided at that point that I think there was some opportunity to build some stuff in Minneapolis. So took a chance and saved up a little dough, and then made a break.
So now you're the co-founder of Hall Sweeney Properties. When did you kind of start having the idea, and you kind of just touched on this when you were going to go, but two, you had gone from buying existing Class B and tertiary markets to a totally different business model, which is urban infill in like a tier 1 market. So when did you have the idea, and why was this the idea instead of maybe continuing to buy, Class B stuff?
Sure. No, that's a great question. A couple things. One, and again, this is a hindsight answer. I think I've always lived in cities my whole life. Even in Madison, we lived kind of in the urban core. I've never lived out in the suburbs. I've never, been out there much. I mean, been out there much is the wrong way to say it, but for me, I think my instincts have always been city. It's just always been like I can go block to block and kind of tell you what should be where. I have always told people like I feel safer in downtown Manhattan than I do, in some third ring suburb somewhere. And that's not a slight. Everybody's different, right? We're all wired and built differently. And for me, and Chris, admittedly I was starting to get bored with it. I was getting sick of traveling to Wichita and Des Moines, and again, it's no disrespect to those cities; they're great places. But I wanted to get back into the city and do stuff there. And I a lot of people told me when I left Timberland, and I was thinking about it. Yeah, you got to go buy a bunch of Class B, start a fund, do this, do that. And admittedly, I thought we were close to the top of the market. I said, I mean, here, how smart am I, right? Jeez. But I was looking at, 5 years later, whoops. But I thought, I was buying things, Chris, at Timberland, most of the stuff we were buying, and it seems funny now, but, we were buying 7 caps in Nashville.
Yeah.
And, for me, things were in the 5s and the high 4s at that point. And I thought, there's just no way, right? There's no way this can continue. And I knew, through seeing other people, through a lot of different things, that my first deal had to be a success, or my first fund, or whatever I did first had to work, because if it didn't, I'm going back to the employment line. I just wasn't sure that going out, raising a fund, or putting some money together and buying a couple of Class B assets at a 4.5 or a 5 cap was going to work.
Yep.
Turns out I was totally wrong, and it would have been just fine. But we'd be selling them all at 3 caps now, and it's worked out great. But again, you do the best you can with the information you have at the time, right?
Yeah.
And I started poking around in Minneapolis and stumbled across the site in a really good location. And a friend of mine was the broker, and she called me and said, "Hey, what do you think I should do with this site?" And I was looking at it, and I said, "I'll buy it." And over the course of a weekend, I put it under contract and started working on it, and was planning to do like a 45 unit apartment building. And I got about 3-4 weeks in and realized, A, this is going to take me 2 or 3 years. B, I don't have any income then, so what am I going to do? And C, I don't know if I know what the heck I'm doing. So what ended up transpiring was there was another developer who I knew who had built 4 or 5 projects kind of along that corridor. And I called him and I said, "Look, here's what I've got. What do you think I should do?" And over the course of a couple months, I ended up assigning my contract to him. He took over the development and kind of ran with it. And that it wasn't a huge payday by any stretch of the imagination, but gave me a couple bucks to realize, hey, I can probably last 6 months or a year now. Maybe I can go find another one. And what the light bulb that went off when that happened was, none of the big guys are looking at these things. And the guys who are buying duplexes and fourplexes and that stuff, like this is probably a little out of their wheelhouse. I said, maybe there's an opportunity, maybe there's some more of these sites around town. And I started looking and I realized these are everywhere, right?
Yeah.
These 50, 60, 70 unit sites, I had enough expertise to put them together. So these are all over town. And so I started looking, and my goal, Chris, in the beginning was find a couple consulting deals where I could be a project manager for hire or something to keep a little food on the table. And, maybe in the first 12 months, I'd find another site. That was the hope. I thought if I could do that, I would be successful and that would be great. I'd just finishing up a deal then now probably, and that would have been fantastic. But as luck would have it, and I'm the first one to admit how absolutely lucky I've been. I put together 5 sites in the first 6 months,
That's
and
so
it
awesome.
just kind of went from there. Yeah.
So did you have it's Hall Sweeney, you have a partner. How did you find your partner and what role does he play in your company?
Sure. Good question. So Jeff has been a mentor to me for many years prior to me starting the company. And that, and there again, looking back, right, you start building those relationships long before you know how they're going to play out or what's going to happen. He was a mentor to me, and he was one of the guys as I was considering leaving my firm or my job, kind of encouraging me, saying, I think you've got the chops. I think you could do this. You only live once, go give it a whirl. And when I got that, not the first site that I flipped, but when I found basically the next site, I called him, and because we weren't partners yet, none of that I was just out on my own trying to figure things out. And I called him and said, look, I think I'm about to tie up this site. I know this other broker also. What I don't want to do is get the reputation as a guy who ties up sites and then can't execute. One of the huge lessons learned from my time at Timberland, right, is you always execute. You do what you say. If you don't get a second swing usually.
Yep.
And I was very, very conscious of that. So I called him and I said, look, I haven't tied it up yet. I'm close. What do you think I should do? And it was funny. He was actually in Colorado skiing. And he's like, hey, I'm at the top of the mountain. Let me ski to the bottom and then I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Calls me back and he says, well, tell me your vision. Just walk me through what you think here. And I spent 15, 20 minutes talking to him about the deal. And he said, that seems like a good opportunity. He goes, why don't we do it together? And I was just like, okay. I mean, no, I don't even know what that means, but okay, that sounds great. And, it ended up, we partnered on that deal and just had a great working relationship. And it's kind of gone from there. Obviously in the early days, he's a big part of our, financial piece of our projects and a lot of that. And I'm, similar to my other roles, I'm out there hustling, finding sites, putting stuff together. And, now we work together to get them to the finish line.
And so to set the tone, because we're going to pick one deal that you've kind of executed on, and we're going to start from idea to end. But can you set the stage of, are you two the only 2 full-time employees, or do you have anybody else in the company? Because there's a lot of people that I get all the time that are in that, it might be like it's what I started out. It's where you are. It's where a lot of people are, the one-man band. You can get a lot done as a one-person show, but I want to set the stage for how many folks you have full-time with you.
Sure. Well, right now it is just the 2 of us.
Boom.
We don't have any.
Even better.
Everything else is third party consultants. For hire, so to speak. And one caveat too, Chris, to mention, I think is important to the story is, as we got going, I realized quickly that, I really enjoyed working with Jeff. I thought we were going to be really good partners. I thought this thing could really go somewhere. But I also realized I can't just do one deal and stay in the game for 2, right? I got to get a little bit more going in the meantime.
Yeah.
And And to his credit, Jeff and I had several conversations with him, and he, being the great person that he is, said, "Look, yeah, I'm not ready to jump into 5 apartment deals at once. I think that might, we might be over our skis a little if we do that." He's he's an industrial developer too, so hadn't done an apartment deal prior to working with me. And
Yeah.
said, if you can go either find other deals or kind of get your nose into some other partnerships in the short term, like, you should go do that.
Yeah.
And so, to Jeff's credit, of the 6 deals I've completed, half have been with Jeff, and the other 3 have been in different partnerships where I've served as one of the general partners, working with other groups. So, to his credit, not a lot of people would tell someone to go do that.
Yeah.
Um, he did, which has been great, and that's been great for us in a number of ways. A, kept me in the game, but B, I've learned so much by working with some other people as well. And now that we're kind of where we are with our projects, going forward, we're really just going to build the Hall Sweeney brand. I'm at a place now where I don't really have to do those other partnerships. Jeff and I can do, a solid deal or 2 every year, and should be just fine. Um,
That's
so
great.
just want to put that out there, because that's a lot of people have asked me, how did you get so many deals done in such a short amount of
Yeah.
time? And part of it is, I was really fortunate to have other partners as well, and other people who brought me into projects.
That's awesome. And I was hoping you were going to say it was just the two of y'all, because I think it gives a lot of inspiration to a lot of people that you can move a mountain with a short staff in real estate if you have good third parties and consultants. All right, well, let's just kind of dig into a deal. I don't know if we want to pick one particular that you've worked on, but let's just frame it from the very start. How long do these deals take from the day you kind of walk the site for the first time to the day it's stabilized?
Sure. No. In a perfect world, let's see. I always tell, so when I'm, and I'll start at the beginning, and then we can do the math together.
Yeah.
um, when I see a site, or I drive by, or somebody calls me and says, "Hey, you should go check this out," or, my dad's uncle's brother's friend has a house that he wants to sell, or, whatever it ends up being. When I have that first interaction with a potential seller, one of the first things I tell them is, my goal is to start construction 1 year from today. That's about, at a minimum, how much time I'm going to need. And then, tons of negotiation about contracts and other things with them.
Yeah.
But I always say, from the day a site becomes like, hey, this is an actual potential, in a best case scenario, it's usually about a year before we're breaking ground. Um, I've been really fortunate to date. Most of them have stuck right to just about that year. Um, and here, maybe unlike Texas, we also have to be conscious of the timing of the weather. Right? I mean, in an ideal world, you start the process in March or April, so you're ready the following March or April to break ground.
Yeah.
It's totally possible to break ground in December, January, February, and I, broke ground on one project in November. But you're sometimes paying extra for ripping the frost, or doing other things with the ground that you don't have that stuff. If you start in March or April. And most of the projects I've worked on too, size wise, the construction is 12 to 14 months. So it's kind of perfect timing. If you can start in March, deliver, 12 to 14 months later, you're in prime leasing season. So that's a long answer to the question, but 12 months for, let's call it, pre-development,
Mm-hmm.
12 to 14 months for construction. So then we're we're a little over 2 years at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then, depending on the deal, I mean, and again, I have been beyond fortunate as far as my lease ups have gone. One of my first project leased up, I was 100% full 45 days after we opened.
Wow.
Uh, I've got a deal right now. I just came from this meeting before this, 112 unit project. We opened April 1st, and we're 81% leased already.
Dude, that's
Um,
awesome.
it's just, I mean, I wish I could tell you why. I mean, other than we got a good market here, and obviously something we're doing is resonating with tenants to some degree. But I'm usually planning if I'm going to deliver a project, let's say 100 units, Chris. If I'm going to deliver 100 units in April or May of a year, my hope is that by October, when the market, and here, I don't know if it's similar in Texas, but leasing falls off a cliff after October here because
Yeah.
nobody's
Yeah.
moving in January and December and November and all this fun stuff. On a 100-unit project, I've got 125 in the ground right now. The goal is to deliver that next May and hopefully be stabilized by October.
Okay. So, if most things go as planned, you kind of just laid out, a 2.5 year kind of conception to stabilize kind of timeline.
Yeah, and that's if things, and that's if things go to plan.
Right.
Of the 6 that have completed, I would say 5 have gone to plan. One, there was a lawsuit and some other things, so it did not go to plan. But but that's. I mean, and again, I've been in development and in this long enough now to, as I said earlier, like the fact that 5 of them have gone to plan is just, I mean, you could never plan for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just luck. It's just absolute luck.
I say this moderately joking, but a developer that hasn't gotten into a lawsuit is not truly a developer yet. It's kind of table stakes in some form or fashion. All right. I want to get into what you asked for in a contract, but let's just start with the land. Like, what are you looking for what makes a site great for you and the projects that you're doing? What's the data you're looking at, the neighborhoods? What boxes need to be checked for you to go, that's a good deal besides price?
Sure. Couple things. I mean, our business plan in general is we're building smaller units in what we call really highly desirable areas. And the biggest pitch is the neighborhood is the amenity. So I'm looking for sites in neighborhoods that I know people want to live in, because of, they're already established. I mean, and there's some risk to that in the neighborhood process and other things, but my motto, my thinking is I would rather take upfront entitlement risk or risk with neighborhood or, have to fight a little to get something approved, knowing that if I do, I've got a great site in an established neighborhood that I know there's demand for. And I think everybody who's in real estate or frankly, what neighborhoods in your city are strong, right? Where people want to be.
Right.
And the new piece here is we've had a lot of transit built over the past 10 years. So I'm also doing my best to, locate those near transit as much as possible. So maybe just giving an example, the project that we have under construction right now, which is 125 units, it's one block north of Minnehaha Falls Park, which is basically the nicest park in the city. It's 2 blocks east of a light rail stop, and the light rail can take you to the airport, downtown, suburbs, wherever you want to go. And it's in a kind of what I'd consider an up and coming neighborhood. So it has a lot of boxes checked right off the bat. And we look at things. The other thing we look at is what direction is the neighborhood going? Because for the most part, given the way we think about development, design, the other pieces, we're not adverse to selling projects, but and it's probably the cardinal rule that you're not supposed to do. We do fall in love with them a little bit sometimes because it's you're working on the same project, you're designing it from scratch, and you spend 3 years of your life on it. It's hard to say, yeah, let's just sell that right away when we're done. At least for us.
Yeah.
And we're looking to build a long-term portfolio too. I mean, we're not traders. We're not. We're looking to build really nice projects in good areas. We'll hold on to them. We've got great management teams, and my goal is to just do as many of those over time as I can. And my attitude is, I'm 43 now. By the time I'm 60, should be fine.
Yep.
So that's a big thing: is established neighborhoods that we see improving over time. We've gone back and forth. We've done some projects in neighborhoods that have a lot of competition, and other projects in and there's some advantages to that, right? Because there's a built-in market already because there's tons of other things. We've also done some projects in some more up-and-coming neighborhoods where they have a lot of the infrastructure we're looking for, but maybe there's only a handful of apartment buildings available or whatever. And I'd say luckily we've had success in both, kind of for different reasons.
Is most of the stuff that you're putting under contract unentitled for multifamily, or does it at least allow you maybe multifamily and you're just getting other types of entitlements, or is everything you're doing kind of a total up zone?
Yeah, it's been, Chris, honestly, it's been a little bit of everything. Some of the sites we've bought have already been, zoned for multifamily. I mean, we always have to go through the entitlement, even if it's zoned or something. We always have to go through the process to get the formal approvals and all of that. Obviously, an easier situation when it's already zoned for it. Again, the project that we just started, a month and a half ago, was going to be zoned appropriately, but the city was in the middle of changing a comp plan. So we
Mm-hmm.
actually did have to get a rezoning. So during the pandemic, I had to go door to door to 21 houses to try to convince 13 of them to sign a petition allowing me to apply for a rezone. To this day, I have no idea how we pulled that off. I mean, I just can't. But one of the things that has been working in our favor is, and first to admit this, is the city of Minneapolis is very pro density, very pro development right now. Is really, we've been a real up and coming city the past 5 or 10 years, and that has a lot of great things. Brings its challenges too, right? So the city has been pretty proactive about um, upzoning certain areas, and I think in a good way, preserving the single family neighborhoods where it's appropriate, but then allowing developers on commercial corridors and nodes to build higher, right?
Right.
So to have kind of all of those uses. So, we've certainly been the beneficiary of that as well.
How do you find them? Are you working brokers? Are you cold calling? Are you driving streets? How do you find your sites?
That's a good question. It's kind of a mix. I mean, when I started, it was driving, knocking on doors, sending letters, calling broke. I mean, basically, as you can imagine, telling everybody and here's what I'm looking for. Here's what I do. Let me know if you ever hear anything. And you chase a lot of bad leads that way, but you don't have a choice, right? That's how you get started. A lot of that. Good. One of I think the big takeaways from my time at Timberland was, especially as the market got more and more competitive, was I learned, you know, really good deals are hard to come by, and if you find one, you act quickly.
Yeah.
You don't mess around. So I'll tell you, there's been plenty of times when a good site has fallen in my lap on a Friday afternoon or a Friday night or a Saturday morning, and I can wait till Monday. More than likely would have been fine if I waited till Monday, but I had that drilled in my head that when they come around, you don't wait.
Yeah.
So like that very first site I flipped came to me on a Friday afternoon, and I had an LOI by Monday morning.
Yep.
And I worked all weekend. We just had a baby. I told my wife I'm sorry, but we got to eat. I got to feed this kid, so we're gonna make this happen. And, but I worked all weekend to make sure that it was ready, and that was a big takeaway from my time at Timberland. Was like, look, you don't when there's a good one on the line, you don't mess around, you get it done right away.
Yep.
So that's been, I've been the beneficiary of that. The first deal that I did, Colo Apartments. I was literally getting my haircut, or I was waiting in line to get my haircut, and which I obviously haven't done in a long
You get
time.
haircuts?
Yeah, I know. I
I'm
used to have,
kidding.
dude. I used to have a little flow hawk, and yeah, it's a whole new vibe these days. Yeah, I call it my Jesus of Nazareth look.
I love it.
But um, I was waiting in line to get my hair cut, and I was literally like scrolling through Facebook or something on my phone. This was like mid 2017, and a buddy of mine who's a retail broker and an office broker had kind of a mismatched listing, and he threw it up on Facebook and said, "Hey, I've got this 1-story senior center. I don't even know where do I start?" I texted him right away and I said, "Jeremy, that's exactly what I'm looking for. How soon can I meet you at the site?" And he's like, "I'm there right now." And put the phone, I said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Put the phone down, skipped the haircut, ran right over there. So I was the first one there. And again, I could have probably you never know, right? But again, if there's a
Yeah.
hot one on the line, you go get it done. So I convinced him, even though it was my first one, I convinced him I'd get it done. I called Jeff 20 minutes after leaving Jeremy, and that's how it all came together.
I love it. All right. So let's run with that site for a little bit. So you find the site, we've kind of gone through what you look for in a market. You show up to the site, you like it. Then I'm assuming you go back to an Excel model or some type of underwriting. What does that kind of preliminary underwriting look like? And what kind of are your big variables that you're messing with?
Sure. And if it's okay, I'm going to tell you my process now. I will tell you that that's a less, I made every mistake in the book on that one.
Let's do
I
it.
did a lot. I did a lot of things out of order and whatever. But what I would do, what I do today is so if I have that meeting with a seller, right, or the broker, whoever's there, um, my next call, I mean, I know now, I know enough about the zoning in the city that I can actually get pretty close on my own. If I know how big the site is, what the potential zoning is, how many stories I can build, I can come pretty close on how many units I can build.
Yeah.
So I can pretty much quickly figure that out now. But as soon as if it's anything more than like a 30-second sniff test, my first call is to my architect, and I say, look, confidentially, here's the site I'm looking at. Um, how quick can we figure out how many units we can build? Because I need to know that based so for what I can pay.
Yeah.
And I mean, those guys are awesome. And this is for many architects. They can just quickly look at a site. My guy always tells me, I need an hour. Give me an hour, and I can get back to you with something pretty good. So
Yep.
I'll quickly do that. Get quickly understand. Okay, we can build a 6-story project. Somewhere in the 120 to 130 unit range. So and again, it's a little bit soft, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the estimate. And then I can knowing the rents in the area, I can quickly figure that out. Here's what the rents are. Here's how many units we can build. Here's about um, what it's going to look like, and then another quick call to one of my builder friends, and hey, here's what I'm looking at. And again, I have enough data from past projects now that a lot of this I can sometimes just do, but
Yeah.
that would be the process. Would be to call a builder and get a quick spot check on price. Again, most of the good builders in any market can tell you, look, you're building a 6-story. If you're building a 5/2 or a 6/1 or this or that, right? You're going to be at either this a square foot roughly, or what I like to do, because my projects kind of vary in size sometimes, is I like to take it at a hard cost per unit. Can you tell me, is this going to cost me 150 a door to build, 130 or 180? And any good builder, again, can take 20 minutes and tell you that usually.
Yep.
So I've spent a grand total of an hour on it at this point, maybe two. And I've got an architect's opinion and a builder's opinion, and then I can quickly dive into my underwriting.
Yep.
And again, at this stage, I'm not doing 10 pages of waterfalls and tabs and everything. I mean, it's just a quick, like, here's the rent, here's the cost. Does this seem to look like it makes sense?
And not to ask the easiest question in the book, but how do you pull rent? Are you looking at comps within a mile? Especially in some of these areas where you might be building kind of a pioneer project. Like, how do you think about what rent's going to be?
Yeah, it's comps within whatever distance I've got. Basically, if there's nothing within 2 miles, then I got to give it my best guess based on what's 2 miles away. Obviously, in the areas where there's a bunch of other buildings, in certain submarkets, it's pretty quick these days with apartments.com and other things to go on and get a quick sense of where things are that day.
All right.
Uh,
So preliminary underwriting looks good. Site visit looks good. Architects and builders have kind of given you some rough numbers. You've checked all your boxes, green lights. Then what happens?
so then it's LOI.
Okay.
And everybody does it a little differently. I always like to go LOI first, because my attitude is again, everybody's time is valuable, and I want to make sure we've got a reasonable seller with a reasonable agreement before we before we spend 3 weeks negotiating a purchase agreement.
Yep.
Uh, so I'll hammer out an LOI, submit it, hopefully get everybody on board. Um, assuming we can keep that where we want to, or it's within the range we're willing to do. We'll move to a purchase agreement after that. And I always tell people, and it's everybody does it a little differently. I don't think it's wise to spend any money on a site until you have a purchase agreement. Right. I don't think there's any. I mean, you have to spend money on your attorney, obviously, on the purchase agreement, but up to that point, you should be able to do all that for free, even if you're new and you've never done it before.
Yeah.
A lot of architects. I mean, you can pretty much figure out who's designing what buildings in town, and if you call an architecture firm that's doing 10 active deals and you say, "Hey, I'm looking at a site," they'll spec an hour for you, for sure. So up to purchase agreement, I don't think you should have spent $1 or at least very, very minimal amounts of money. Get it under contract. Once you do that, for us, the next step right away is third-party reports. We want to know what we've got, again, before we get too deep on anything. Assuming we have time in the contract, and it's not always this way. I mean, sometimes we have to run parallel tracks with design and third-party reports. In a perfect world, we do the third-party reports first. We do the survey, we do the phase 1 environmental, we do the geotechnical, and if needed, we do a phase 2 environmental. That basically lays out everything we need to know about the soil, the site, the contaminants, any issues that we would encounter. We know that. We try to find that out right away, and lesson learned, I will tell you, you do that second, you spend $50,000 on design only to find out, oh, whoops, I can't build 4 stories here. I can't do, and you can imagine why I know that.
Yeah.
As I said, I've made a lot of the mistakes, and luckily I've made it through. But so that would be the next. That's kind of that next step, right? Is getting your arms around what's there from an environmental and also, I would throw a survey in there and get updated title reports. I have my attorney review the survey and the title just to make sure there's nothing funny going on before I start diving in.
Before we go further than that, let's take one step back again to the contracts, because I've been a developer. I'm not anymore, but I've also sold a lot of unentitled sites that I went under contract with a developer. What terms matter? I know there's lots of extensions. I know there's zoning cases. What terms matter to you, and what does the site need to be by the time you're ready to close, a year later?
Sure. Frankly, a lot of them matter, but the biggest thing for me is time.
Yeah.
If I can get it. And what I try to get across to any seller is, look, in the next 12 months, I'm going to spend $250,000 of my own money, 150, 200, 250. I mean, there's going to be, we're putting real money out after this thing. And for us to do that, and then have to close before we know what we've got, it's maybe not worth it to us.
Yeah.
And that varies in every market. And I remember there was a Twitter conversation about that's impossible in my market, and et cetera, et cetera. And I get that. I mean, I understand that there are places where, land is so scarce and people are chasing it so hard that sellers are going to say, I don't care what you have to do once you buy it from me. That's your problem. We're still, and again, we're still fortunate here that at least in my experience, I've still been able to negotiate, about a year to close typically.
Yeah.
And in those contracts, what I'm looking for is, and I'll set benchmarks, and there's been times where, because I'll say, I think the thing that sellers hate is if you set up a contract, say I'm going to close in a year, and then they don't hear from you for 9 months, right?
Right.
I mean, that makes them crazy. So what I try to do is set up benchmarks and say, look, within 3 months, I'll have the survey and the title done and the phase 1, and I'll shoot you a note and let you know that that's complete. And then, 3 months after that, I'll have the phase 2 and the geotech, the schematic design, and we'll already be talking to the city. 3 months after that, 3 to 4 months after that, if everything is on track, I'll have city approvals. And then, 2 or 3 months after, I need, give or take, 3 months after city approvals, maybe 4, depending on the time of year, get construction documents finished, get our demo permit ready, raise the equity, get the debt in place, and start construction. So in a perfect world, and we were able to do this on our recent project, we put it under contract early last year. We closed March 31st, and we started construction April 1st.
I remember seeing that one on Twitter.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, it doesn't always work that way, but because the land, as a developer who's not land, as a small shop, right? And this is the difference between me and a bigger group. We don't really have the ability to land bank for extended periods of time. Well, I shouldn't say that. We do, but it's a very poor use of our capital,
Right.
right? To be land banking a $2 million site for, oh, we didn't get approvals. Now what are we going to do, right? I mean, that's a game we try to avoid. I mean, sometimes it happens,
Yeah.
and have to close on a site prior to when we would want to,
Yep.
but as much as we can, we try to wait till we're literally ready to start construction.
Yep.
I would say, if not construction, city approvals are pretty key. I'm, you know, it would be very difficult for me to want to close on a site until I know I have city approvals.
Yep. No, I hear you. And I think what you were saying about folks that are willing to close on land before that, it really isn't that way in Texas either, unless you're a high-rise developer in like Miami or New York or San Francisco or something. Traditionally, nobody's really being forced to close. So that's pretty normal in Texas. What stages of the contract do you put up hard money? Do you put up any hard money before city approvals?
Sure. So we'll typically do. I mean, we'll do soft, obviously soft earnest money right away.
Hmm.
Right, within 3 to 5 days or whatever the seller wants. Again, I try to keep that relatively low. Again, using the argument that like I'm putting a lot of money I can never get back
Yeah.
potentially against this thing starting next week. So if I have to give you $50,000 of earnest money, it just accelerates my risk pretty tremendously, and I'm not as excited about this deal.
Yep.
Um, so again, we're trying to avoid it as much as possible. Um, we had a situation on our last project where with COVID and some of the interruptions, we did need some extensions, and one of the three parcels that we were trying to buy just absolutely didn't want to. Just said, no, you got to close. And we just said, well, we're not going to do it. And we ended up negotiating a small hard money deposit every month to get us an additional 3 or 4 months to get to the end. I mean, it was pretty inconsequential to us, the amount that we had to put down. And forgive me, I don't remember for sure. If I'm almost sure we credited it towards closing if we closed, but if we didn't, he got to keep it.
Got it. All right. One more question kind of on the contract period, but like what city approvals as it relates to your market are you typically getting on these deals? And I'm pretty sure it's transferable to most markets, but what are you usually getting from the city?
So we're getting basically at a minimum the planning commission has to give us site plan approval,
Hmm.
which if we go in with needing no variances, needing like we're building a project by right, at a minimum we have to get a site plan approval by the planning commission. What that involves is what's called a land use submittal, where we put there's a whole package we put together that gets submitted to the city, that gets heard at the planning commission, and then it's either approved, denied, or extended. If it gets denied, we can appeal it, and if a neighbor appeals it, it can also be appealed. It would be appealed to then the city council, and then they have the ability to approve or deny. Um, Basically, what are called your land use approvals. There's
Yep.
also plan development review, which kind of runs concurrently with that. That's where all the city departments, fire, traffic, everybody is evaluating your plan also and just making sure it checks kind of all the boxes in their departments. Um, that's
Yeah.
usually a little bit more. I would say that's less controversial, right? That's more of a like, does this check the codes and the boxes? Yes. Okay, great. It's usually
Yep.
the land use approvals that can be tougher. That's what, if you do have neighbor resistance or any sort of resistance, it's always at the land use approval stage.
Yep.
And
Oh,
once we have that, then we're applying for the actual, building permit, demo permit, footings and foundation permit. But once we have the land use approvals, we can apply for that stuff.
okay. And I said it was the last question, but I think this is kind of the bigger thing before we actually break ground. So you're under contract. You have done all your preliminary third party surveys. We talked about, now it's time for design. And I want to ask you about design, but um, at what point are you hiring the architect? Are you getting it, who's participating with the architect? Do you have your GC participate with the architect so that an architect, a GC says this is what it's going to cost, but they're actually working in tandem with the architect? What's going on to get the thing on budget to where it's being designed how you want it, and there's a contractor that is making you feel good that it's going to be delivered on time and on budget?
Sure, sure. Yep. No, that's a really really good question. Again, everybody does it a little bit differently,
Yeah,
but what we have found success with is part of the um, challenge obviously in having a small firm is there's only so much time available, there's only you know so many things going on that we're trying not to reinvent the wheel every time with our process.
right.
So we have kind of fallen into, we've got a great architectural relationship now, and we're using the same firm most of the time. Sometimes there's a project that's outside their expertise or they're just too busy. There's a few things that come up. Same with builder. We're typically using the same builder every time now. And so what we're doing is, as we're starting the design with the architect, um, I'm getting at various points as we progress kind of a spot check on the price from the contractor, saying, here's you gave me this initial bid, or this initial, you gave me this initial spitball number. Here's kind of our updated set of plans. They can go through pretty quickly and give me, hey, yep, you're still on track, or this is accelerated or gone down or changed. And we do that every couple months throughout the design process, just to keep ourselves on the right path.
Right.
And if we are going to use that particular builder for a project, um, we will typically bring them in, kind of usually after city approval. I mean, we'll get close to city approvals and we'll get the city approvals. And then as we create the construction documents and make all the final changes prior to building, we'll typically bring that builder in at that point.
Yeah.
So they're basically, seat at the table with us. What you get approved by the city is, it's a schematic design. It has civil information, it has the civil engineering and the architecture in Minneapolis. What it doesn't have is the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all those other pieces of how a building comes together. Those are not a large part of the city approvals. So we start doing that immediately after, and that's when we usually bring our contractor in so they can assist us in helping us through that piece of it.
Are there any big points in a contract with a GC that matter to you? Because we were joking earlier about the lawsuits, but I think one of the biggest places that developers go wrong when they don't own their own GC is through the building. That's where things can get really kind of crazy. How do you keep everybody in line, accountable, and rowing in the right direction?
That's a good question. So we a couple of ways to answer that. One is, as we were getting started, we did kind of the traditional get the plans to design development or construction documents, and then formally bid those out to 3 to 5 groups. I mean,
Yeah.
we went through that process initially. I don't remember how many. Let's say 2 or 3 times. What we found was one group was consistently in the top two. Um, Built our first 2 projects, did an absolute bang up job. We're honest, we're transparent. We just had a really good experience, and they were easy to work with, and so they've kind of become our go to some degree. Um, but the way, and they have kind of an interesting method, and I admittedly, again, I don't know if others have done this or not, but in our contracts or in our budgets with them, we have a shared contingency. They
Hmm.
carry a construction contingency, and then there's a sharing of that between us and them. So I am just making up numbers. Let's say that's $400,000 on a project, right?
Right.
We provide the specs. We provide all the data to them. They bid out the project. They get it all teed up. We get our maximum price. Everything's set. I have yet to do a project either on my own or when I was at various firms that there hasn't been a little bit of discrepancy on that, right? Like, oh, we thought you guys said this kind of countertop and we actually bid this one.
Yeah.
Or, again, it's not 50 things, but there's always a couple of things that, oh, shoot, just through the process got, slipped through the cracks somehow. Um, what I have found in the shared contingency model is it eliminates a lot of the fighting, or a lot of the like, well, you screwed this up. No, you screwed this up. Now we're going to sit and fight about it for 3 weeks, as opposed to figuring out a solution. So basically, where we've landed with these guys is like, if you miss something in the spec, it comes out of that contingency. If I make a change, or if I ask, basically anything they miss comes out of there. But if they're able to help us value engineer certain things, or make suggestions to our project, that's money that can get added to that contingency. So it's a contingency that we're both trying to keep as high as possible, because then we can split it at the end.
Right.
And I haven't done that on certain projects, and then it really does become, it really is a you said I said kind of headbutting battle for 12 to 16 months, which works really well for some people. It's not my style. It's just
Yeah.
I'm not confrontational. Admittedly, I don't like to fight. I don't like to get into arguments with people. I don't like to, I don't like to light people up, so to speak. And it's for me, again, a big piece of this is just the enjoyment of the process.
Yeah.
And I don't want to spend 12 to 16 months arguing every week with somebody about something. It's not how I'm wired and what I like to do. So we've set this up in a nice way that, again, it's not that we don't have disagreements. It's not that stuff that, I have to push back. They have to push back on me. I mean, of course, but it seems like it's become it's a much more enjoyable way to go through the process.
Yep. One more nuanced question on the contractor, and some listeners might think this is too detailed, but developers get this. Who is accountable for the MEP and structural engineers? Your architect, your contractor, or you?
That's a good question. It depends a little on the project. We typically have our builder doing that. Actually, I should say architect will typically do mechanical sometimes, but it's a mix between the architect and the builder depending on the project. I'm typically trying to stay out of that as much as I can.
All right, design. I truly, and I very much mean this. I'm not brown nosing because we're doing this awesome episode. Your thoughtfulness behind design precedes you. It's very obvious that it matters a lot to you. So, a couple questions on where do you get inspiration from, and how do you think about design, and who are you hiring? Is all of these your ideas that you're feeding to the architect? Do you just have an amazing architect? Why are you so good at design?
That's a good question. Thank you. I mean, that's flattering. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. There's a bunch of different reasons. I mean, of course, first and foremost, great architects.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely great architects. And I take a lot of inspiration from the cities I've lived in. My wife likes to tell the story that when we lived in San Francisco, we'd have friends come to town and they'd, hey, let's go to this bar, let's do this. And I'd always say, hey, let's drive around and look at the new buildings. And they're always like, what's wrong? Like, it's always been something that's just kind of been a piece of me in a way. I mean, it's just always like when I was a little kid, I used to like to walk around my neighborhood and look at all the houses. And I can't explain it. I don't know where it came from. My mom had an artistic background, and so maybe there's a little bit of a DNA there that got transferred to me. But it is something that's always mattered to me, and it's always felt important. I admittedly, Chris, didn't think anyone would care. I mean, I didn't set out to do these amazing designs that like people would respond. It was more so when I started to do projects that I thought, hey, I have a certain aesthetic. I'm going to try to make this first one look that way. Well, let's see what happens. And I didn't expect the reception that it got.
Yep.
And it happened on the second one. It happened on the third one, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, maybe I am doing this a little bit differently. It wasn't a like, I think I can do it better. It was mainly just, I want to do it my way. And I honestly didn't think anybody would care.
Would
Um,
would you say that you spend more on your projects because they're so design forward, or you're coming in on budget with everybody else? You're just putting in the time to really thoughtfully think through it rather than kind of crank these out like they're just a widget.
um, yes. I mean, I don't, admittedly, I don't think that we spend any more. I mean, we're using the same materials. We're
Yeah.
using the same off shelf materials as everybody else.
Yep.
Uh, I will say, having partnered with other people and gone through other, and worked in other groups and gone through other processes, I do think it matters to us more. And I don't say that as that's not a good or a bad thing.
Yeah.
Um, I do think, development. I mean, development for me has become more of a calling or a passion, I think, and less about how much money I'm going to make over time. And not that that's good, bad, or ugly. I think for some, it's let's build the most efficient, building we can and get it filled up right away. And I think it'll look decent, and let's call it a day. I think that's how a lot of people think about it. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think
Yep.
there's anything wrong with that. I think we spend a little more time and a little more effort, and dare I say, have slightly more talent in that department. I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to
Yeah.
sound whatever.
You do.
But
I'll be the one to say it.
it honestly, it just matters more to me. There's something like you know, if the only thing that ever comes from this for me is in 30 years, my kids can drive around this town, or people who know me and say, "Oh, there's one of Sean's." That's literally good enough for me.
Yeah. That's such a cool part about real estate. It's there, you can drive by it. It's going to be there in a long time, and that could be good or bad. In
Yep,
your
yep.
case,
And and the thing is too, Chris, that for those that somebody called me out on Twitter the other day saying, obviously you don't care about money, which I got a kick out of. But look, my attitude is also, I mean, I think I said earlier, you've heard how my projects have performed,
right?
right? So trust me, it's not me not trying to make money. It's that piece of it. My attitude with that piece of it is like, if I can build really good projects in really good locations that stand the test of time, the money's going to take care of itself.
For sure. What would Twitter be without those people? We just need them. Um, do you think you're getting paid premiums and rent because you're design forward and you're really thoughtful about these buildings?
Um, yeah, yes and no.
Yeah.
I think in certain locations, yes.
Yeah.
Uh, I think in certain locations, no.
Okay.
Um, I think it depends. Part of what, as I said earlier, part of what we're doing is, building smaller units in really nice areas, in really nice buildings, hopefully near transit or other neighborhood amenities. And, we're trying to be that first apartment for somebody, or that second apartment for somebody in an area they want to live in, that, maybe that 750 square foot one bedroom is just a little out of their price range. But they can come live in our 525 square foot well designed one for a couple $100 less a month.
Yep.
And that's been working really well for our business plan. Um, Admittedly, if Minneapolis or if Minnesota ever changes its egregious builder liability laws, which got put in place, I think, in 2008 as a response to a lot of, let's call them sketchy condo conversions that took place at the end of last cycle. I do think potentially someday, if I built condos, I might see a bigger like that piece may come into play more. Or if I'm playing at the higher end of the spectrum, potentially that's where the design would set us apart even more.
Yep. All right. Couple questions on property management. So you've done 45 unit, you're doing 120 unit. On a 45 unit, I would assume you don't have anybody full time on property. Do you on the 120 unit deal?
Yes. So you're correct. We don't. Typically at the smaller projects, 40, 50, 60 units, we'll have a part-time person, and there won't be somebody there full-time on site. A lot of times in that situation, we're hoping to tie them in with another maybe larger property nearby, or property of the same size ish nearby, where we have, for example, we have a 41 unit project, and 6 blocks away we have a 91 unit project, and we have one
Yeah.
manager that covers both of those.
Got it.
So, and their office is at the 91 unit, but they go by, but they're 6 blocks away from the 41, and they go there whenever they need to. The 125 unit will have a full time on site person.
Yep. And on leasing, if I was to go to the 41 unit and wanted to lease, I would just call the number and somebody at the 91 unit would pick it up, and that's how I would, set up my appointment to go lease.
Yep. And a lot of it, I mean, especially in this new construction world, so much of it has moved online, right? In the past couple of years, where you literally go to the website, pick what unit you want, put in all your information, and, sometimes it can happen without even the phone call anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, but that to your question, that's basically the gist of it. Yeah, is you'd figure out the contact, and then that person to come track you down. The architect I use has a really good interior design kind of team in their office.
Yeah.
So that team is usually taking the lead on the interior finishes, colors, all that stuff. I have in the past, when I've used another firm, we have actually brought in like a third party interior design firm to kind of be involved in that process as well.
Yeah. And who does all your common like amenity furniture and stuff? Is that a interior designer, or do you do that?
It's either the interior team at the architecture firm that we use mostly, or it's that same third party group on the other projects.
Can you speak at all to how you process draw requests? Do you hire external accounting, or how do draw requests get approved?
We don't. Jeff does most of
Yeah.
Jeff does those.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we gather the invoice. We're pretty good. I mean, one of the things that being a 2-man firm has forced us to be is extremely organized and extremely, our Dropbox is pretty on point. I mean, we know
Yeah.
where everything is at all times. We have a process where, if I get an email, if I get an invoice sent to me on something, automatically I know exactly what folder in the Dropbox it goes, and then when Jeff goes to do the draws, he's pulling everything out of that folder. We always co-review them, obviously, before they get submitted, because
Yeah.
obviously every once in a while there's something. But yeah, for the most part, he's handling that, and I'm just reviewing them along with them before they go in. We
Okay.
will have third party accountants and other folks doing tax returns, investor returns, all that kind of stuff as well.
Okay.
Because there is a limit on how much we can do.
Yeah. I know I've been peppering you with a lot, but this is just fascinating. The only thing we didn't talk about was financing. How do you finance the projects? And then what are you looking to do once you're stabilized, since you're working on long-term holds?
Yep. So for the most part, and I think most developers that, to your point earlier, that aren't maybe building skyscrapers in New York, are financing their developments with local banks.
Yeah.
That's been the primary source of our debt financing on all the projects we've done. So it's pretty, to be honest, it's pretty uncomplicated. I mean,
Yeah.
we're getting a construction loan for, usually 75. It used to be 80% of the total cost. Now it's usually more like 75. We've been able to, debt. I mean, that's another thing that obviously, given my, 4 years out on my own, I've been very fortunate that there's been very liquid and active debt and equity markets.
Yeah.
That's certainly made our lives very, a lot easier. I've lived through times when those markets are not active, and a lot of good deals, but impossible to get any money together to do them. So we're going out to local banks for the most part, taking let's say a 75% construction loan. We're then raising the equity, the other 20 to 25% of the equity. We're typically rolling our developer fee in as equity as well, and then as well, putting in additional equity on top of that. It's typically our goal. It doesn't work out on every project, given a million different reasons, but it's typically our goal for Jeff and I to be the two largest individual investors in any project we do.
Wow.
Because our kind of ethos around that is like we're not out there trying to just leverage your money. We've spent 2 or 3 or 4 years of our time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears on this. We're making a large bet. We're just we're looking for people who want to come along with us on that bet, basically.
Yep.
And not and it's nice to be on that Schedule A to be the top two names.
Yeah.
It helps. And again, it's not every project. The 41 unit project, for example, Jeff and I did on our own. We didn't bring in any outside investors.
Yep.
But we so that that's our capital step, typically 20-25% equity, 75-80% debt. We're typically doing floating rate debt with these banks. I mean, given the market today, that's we have a couple of projects that we haven't refinanced yet. And part of the reason is we put the loans in place pre-COVID, and there's no floor on the floating rate debt. We've got some low two construction loans right now that we built at 6 to 7s. So we're kind of riding those out for now.
Yeah.
But typically the kind of the business plan is get the deal financed, get it built, get it stabilized. And then if we are in a situation where we have outside investors, we're usually, again, assuming there's a floor on the interest rate, which there has been, COVID and since, usually it's to refinance. And the thought is on the refinance, if the stars have aligned, even to some degree, you've usually created some significant value by building a building.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the hope. So typically we're able to return 20-30% of their initial investment sometimes when we refinance. And then the plan then is to usually hold. Usually we'll try to put permanent debt on, maybe a Fannie or Freddie, or life insurance has been attractive lately. 7-year debt, 10-year debt, kind of depending on the deal and who the investors are. With the thought that we'll give you some of your money back at refinance, and we'll hopefully give you a solid cash flow up for those 7 or 10 years. And then, admittedly, we haven't gotten to that 7 or 10 years yet on any project. So,
Yeah.
We may sell, we may re-up again for another. I mean, we'll kind of, cross that bridge when it comes. But the stuff Jeff and I are doing together, that's been the primary way we've done it. Actually, similar on a couple of the other ones I've done with some other folks. We do have one project that we built that I got into with another group early on, where the business plan all along was just to sell it,
Mm-hmm.
build it and sell it. And so we're going through that process right now, finalizing some BOVs from brokers and everything, and that'll probably come out on the market this summer.
Love it. All right. Just more some high level questions. Some folks sent some stuff in on Twitter, and then we'll bring it home. What is the most popular unit size right now? A smaller 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms? What's interesting right now?
We're still struggling with kind of the middle of the range. I'd say the most popular right now is either the smallest, because it's the least expensive,
Mm-hmm.
or we are also finding some success with some of the larger 2 bedrooms, where given there's been, I would call it, kind of flat rent growth or somewhat flat rent growth the last year or so in Minneapolis. People are now kind of going back to doubling up into larger 2 bedrooms. So we've had either kind of small studio or larger 2 bedrooms. It's kind of that middle where, it's 700 square feet, 800 square feet, 900 square feet, where, that price has gotten to 15, 17, 1800, where somebody says, well, I'd rather pay 2,400 and live with a roommate, or I'd rather pay 1,200 and live alone in a small studio.
Yep.
I think that's partially been COVID driven to some degree also. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
I think how that unit demand kind of shakes out.
What amenities like matter right now? Are you implementing technology or software or, keyless fobs or what amenities matter for your projects?
Sure. We've got, yeah, we do. It's funny because these projects, as we talked earlier, take 2 3 years to come to fruition, and as you know, technology is changing what 10x in that amount of time. So I feel like we're trying to stay as up to date as we can, and I always still feel like we're a little late with some of the stuff, just given how fast it moves. I mean, we've been doing keyless fobs on doors. We've been doing pretty high tech security cameras for a couple years now. We haven't done. I'm starting to hear in our market of like management free buildings where everything's on an app. We haven't gotten to that, certainly to that degree yet. But we're trying to stay as kind of as up to date on that stuff as we can. As far as we sign bulk internet deals typically with local providers, and basically the thought there is they will sell me a bulk deal at a price that I can then offer it to you as a tenant for substantially less than you would pay by calling them directly, and you get two or three
Yeah.
times the speed on your internet. Um, and then I can bill
Yeah.
you back. It's kind of a win-win-win all around for everybody. So we've been doing that. And as far as other amenities, it depends on the size of the project. I mean, our 41 unit project, for example, we just have a small a small fourth floor outdoor kind of deck for folks, as well as an indoor outdoor kind of first floor community room. Really try to activate the street there and the pedestrian experience. Then on our 125 unit that's under construction, we've got we'll have a co-working space, an art gallery. We have traditional retail. We're hoping to get a coffee shop or somebody else in there. We've got a pet wash. We've got a sixth floor community room with a grill, and we have a really sweet rooftop deck with views of downtown Minneapolis.
Are there any repeat issues he sees taking a deal from design to breaking ground? Anything that either you've seen or that you see people kind of constantly come across?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest thing is, I think for people, for developers, or for people who are going through the process who haven't done it before. I tell people this a lot, that development is very, it's not rocket science, but it's very experience based. And I think I've probably seen, I always tell people, on your first deal, always partner, because a good developer, or even a mediocre developer who's been through the process a bunch of times, can save you so much heartache and unknown things. I mean, I tell people when we're talking about partnering or buying a site or whatever, there's going to be 100 deal killers between today and the day you're stable. The difference between somebody like me who's been through the process is I can probably I can see about 96 of them coming. You might
Yeah.
only see 40 if you haven't been through the process, right? I mean, I'm not going to see all
Yep.
100, because every deal, there's a couple of things that come that, nobody expected. COVID, a million other things, right? But
Yeah.
I think that for me, that's the big one, is just, I had a call with somebody the other day who's looking for some assistance on a project, and they haven't done any of the third party reports, but they're hoping to break ground in October of this year. And I'm
Yep.
like, yeah, you're going to be lucky if you break ground next spring. Like, it's
Yeah.
just that stuff. That's the main thing I see, is people that haven't been through the process, not really understanding kind of from beginning to end, as we talked about earlier.
You've now done 6 deals. You've been on your own for 4 years. Kind of looking back, and maybe you've already said it, what are some of the kind of biggest surprises that you weren't expecting? Like what's maybe one thing that as you sit here 4 years from now, you're going, "Man, I just never expected this would happen."
The honest answer is that I was even in a position that somebody asked me that question.
Yeah, that's a
I
good
mean,
answer.
as I told you earlier, my business plan, or my wildest dream, was a couple of consulting gigs to keep some food on the table, and maybe one project. I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that I had sick, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, you know, as I said earlier, I'm literally probably the luckiest real estate developer or investor in the whole United States. I
That's
mean,
awesome.
given what my last 3.5, 4 years have been, and there's no way I could have predicted it. There's no way I could have planned for it. It's been a complete surprise. I mean, I'm extremely, extremely grateful for it, and I'm going to build from it. And I'm very grateful, but it's been a big surprise. I think the other thing, I think I maybe mentioned this earlier too, is just, you know, the the reception I've gotten. I mean, of the 6 projects I've done, 3 of them have been nominated for Project of the Year here.
That's so cool.
I mean, it's just like, what? Like, how does that happen? I mean, again, and it was never part of the plan. It's just like, so. I mean, that to me has been the biggest surprise. That A, anybody cares what I have to say, and B, that I've gotten any sort of positive feedback on any of the work I've done, because it's just absolutely blown my mind. So
Dude, you're
that
you're
I would say
humble.
that's the best surprise by far.
I love it, man. Very humble. All right, one more question and then 2 personal ones, and we'll bring it home. You're the first buddy that I have from Minneapolis. We're kind of a year post some major civil unrest that was going on up there. Uh, One, just how did it impact you? And as it relates to your business, has it changed how you think about your business at all? Or was it kind of a moment in time and we've gotten stronger and better from it? And we're moving on.
Hmm. Um, it was it was intense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll remember the date, March 13th, because that's when kind of COVID, became mainstream, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's when the MB, everything. That's when it was like, okay, this isn't a, even as soon as 2 or 3 weeks before that, it was still like, is this a real thing, or what? Who knows? I mean, and again, your views on that are separate, but just the fact that it became a national or worldwide situation, right? I mean, that
Yep.
was tough. I had 4 projects under construction when that happened.
Yep.
It was brutal. I mean, I first couple months were really tough to figure out, and it was just a lot of sitting and waiting because no one knew what was going to happen. And then to have the tragedy in Minneapolis that we had, just 60 days after COVID started, was just, I mean, it was almost unbelievable. I mean, right? It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it was interesting because I live in the city of Minneapolis. I have projects less than a mile away from where the tragedy took place. I live maybe 3 miles at the most.
Wow.
I'm right. I mean, I'm right there. And as the civil unrest grew and grew, then I understand it. I mean, it was a tragedy. It was a murder, and it was bad. And I understand it, and I understand the angst and the anger and the feelings. It started to spread kind of from that node out through, and I mean, the world saw this right throughout the whole city, and
Right.
it got to I'm very, very, very fortunate that it never made it kind of to my house, my neighborhood, my street.
Hmm.
But there was a couple of nights prior to the National Guard kind of really getting their footing here that I slept on my couch with a baseball bat, because it was
Yeah.
it was scary.
Wow.
And I think the biggest eye opener for me was realizing kind of my privilege and all that,
Yeah.
where it occurred to me, and it is what it is. I wish I had figured this out sooner, but that there's a lot of people who that's their daily life, and it put a lot of things in perspective for me.
Yep.
It really made me realize, how fortunate I am, how fortunate a lot of the people I know are, and we really have a duty to do what we can to help bring others along. We Jeff and I have tried to do that in our business, where we've had our architects hire people of color. We kind of pushed our builder to go out to different subs that maybe they normally wouldn't have. We're trying to incorporate. We see our role as some of the lucky ones to try to bring others along, in this as well. So that's been a real big piece for me and for us. And I think Minneapolis is coming back. I mean,
Yep.
it was a tough year. There's no question. A lot of developers are now in the suburbs. And I'm admittedly out there looking as well. I mean, I'm not, I'm not going to say I'm not, but I also, my next deal is in the city.
Yep.
I've got another site in pre-development that'll be built, big deal that'll be built in the city.
Yep.
I think, we had 10,000 units delivered in 2020. We've got 9,500 scheduled to be delivered this year. And then next year it actually dropped. The projections, I mean, obviously that can change, but the projections are down to about half of that next year, maybe 4,000, 5,000 units delivered. So I think some of the minor softness we're seeing right now, or some of the challenges, I actually am pretty bullish, on 2023, 2024, 2025. I think we're going to see a good run here in the city.
I love it, man. Well, yeah, it's a tough situation, and watching it from Texas was scary. And actually, I think you and I met shortly after that, and I remember you telling me that story about the baseball bat and kind of being freaked out for a couple nights there. I again, watching from afar, it just seemed really intense, and I'm glad to hear the city's healing. Appreciate you sharing that. All
Yeah,
right,
we're on the way back.
what's the best book you've ever read?
That is a great question. I'm gonna name two, if that's okay.
Deal.
For different reasons. Okay,
Okay.
two for different reasons. One, and this is probably as absolutely cliche as it gets, but I will admit that Rich Dad Poor Dad probably changed my life.
Okay.
Um, I was 22, acting, trying to figure out 22, 23, trying to figure out next steps. And I think I had mentioned, business wasn't a thing discussed in my house. I didn't
Yeah.
know people owned, like, it was one of those books that it totally shifted my mental paradigm, where I was like, oh my God, there's a whole other world out here of people doing things. And it was absolutely mind blowing. So it would be disingenuous of me to not mention that book, because it
Okay.
really did, do that. Um, Another one that I am maybe misquoting the title, but it's Emotional Intelligence, or EQ. I think Daniel Goleman is the author.
Mm-hmm.
And and maybe this quick personal story. I mean, one of the things that's, I think I've suffered a little bit from imposter syndrome in real estate, where, um, I didn't go to business school. I don't have an undergraduate real estate degree. I kind of came into it sideways. I've kind of had a lumpy, career path, and now I'm the design guy. It's been a little different for me. And I think I read that book a long time ago, and it made me realize that, you know, there's more to it than experience and IQ. Sometimes, having those intangibles go a long way. And I'm not here to say that I do, but that was a real eye opening book for me, I think, as well, to realize that there's other methods to get things done.
Yeah, I think not that being worth $100 billion is the ultimate goal, but I think like on the Forbes list, like 9% of people on the Forbes list actually like finished college and went the traditional route. We all kind of figure it out differently. All right, dude, this has been more than I could have expected. I'm super grateful. What is the best way that people can find you or your company or reach out to you?
Sure. Well, I mean, admittedly, now it's probably Twitter. It's I've been quote unquote finishing our Hall Sweeney website for about the last 3 months, so it's not done. Not done yet. I'm remiss to say LinkedIn, because it's just the random DM. I mean, it's just, I don't,
Yeah.
yeah, not LinkedIn. Hit me up on Twitter. Yeah, I'm just Sean D Sweeney on Twitter. It's easy to find. If not, I mean, people can email me. Sean D Sweeney at Gmail. Pretty simple as well. So one of those two ways is the best way to track me down.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time today. This really was enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I just really honored and grateful that you'd want me. So I appreciate it very much.